My entitled sister forced me to serve drinks at her engagement party. While serving, I heard her tell guests, "I'm a Berkeley graduate with such accomplished peers from my 4 years there." I slipped her fiancé a note exposing the truth, and what happened next destroyed her entire fabricated life. I'm Emma, 27 years old, currently finishing my master's degree in forensic accounting with a 3.9 GPA and a guaranteed position at a Big Four consulting firm starting at $78,000 annually. My sister Sheila, 29, has spent her entire life as a professional manipulator who never learned that lies eventually catch up with you, especially when you target someone with my analytical skills and access to verification resources. The engagement party incident was the culmination of decades of systematic abuse that I had been meticulously documenting since childhood. Unlike most people who rely on memory and emotion, my accounting background taught me to maintain detailed records of every interaction, every lie, and every instance of mistreatment. I had been building an evidence file on Sheila's fraudulent behavior for years, knowing that eventually, her overconfidence would create the perfect opportunity for strategic intervention. What Sheila failed to understand was that forcing me to serve drinks at her engagement party while she bragged about fake credentials wasn't just humiliating, it was providing me with direct access to her fiancé Jack and all the witnesses I needed to expose her systematic deception. As I moved through the crowd with my serving tray, listening to her elaborate on her fictional Berkeley education, I realized this was the moment I had been strategically preparing for. The lie about her Berkeley degree wasn't just embarrassing family drama. It represented criminal fraud that could result in job termination, legal action, and complete social devastation. Sheila had forged college documents to obtain employment, falsified her entire educational background to secure relationships, and committed what amounted to identity fraud on multiple levels. My forensic accounting training had taught me to recognize financial crimes, and this situation involved systematic document forgery that could carry serious legal consequences. My professional network included attorneys specializing in fraud cases, investigators who handled employment verification, and corporate contacts who understood the legal implications of falsified credentials. Through my internship connections, I had access to resources that could verify educational claims, employment histories, and document authenticity. More importantly, I understood the psychological profile of chronic liars and how to expose them using their own overconfidence against them. The strategic advantage I possessed was comprehensive documentation of Sheila's pattern of deception spanning over 2 decades. I maintained detailed records of her fake gap year claims, her fabricated digital nomad career, her forged college documents, and her systematic manipulation of family members. My accounting background had taught me that fraud cases require establishing patterns of deceptive behavior. Sheila had provided years of evidence. The financial implications of her fraud were substantial and measurable. Sheila had obtained employment through falsified credentials, potentially earning approximately $45,000 annually in wages she wasn't qualified to receive. She had secured housing with Jack based on fraudulent representations of her education and earning capacity. Most critically, she was planning a wedding that would cost an estimated $25,000 to $35,000 based on lies that would eventually be exposed. My academic training in forensic investigation had taught me that the most effective way to expose systematic fraud was through controlled revelation that maximized reputational damage while minimizing the target's ability to create alternative narratives. By documenting her lies in front of witnesses at her engagement party, I could ensure that her professional contacts, family members, and social circle would all simultaneously learn the truth. The note I prepared for Jack contained specific, verifiable facts about Sheila's educational background, employment history, and pattern of deceptive behavior. I included dates, documentation, and witness information that could be independently verified. My forensic training had taught me that effective fraud exposure requires providing evidence that cannot be disputed or reinterpreted as misunderstandings. When Jack read the note during the party, his immediate confrontation with Sheila created exactly the public exposure scenario I had strategically planned. His loud questioning about her college education in front of approximately 40 guests, including her co-workers and manager, ensured that her professional reputation would be immediately damaged. The public nature of the confrontation prevented her from creating private explanations or alternative narratives. The cascading consequences began within minutes of Jack's confrontation. Sheila's co-workers witnessed her admission that she had never attended college, which meant her employment was based on fraudulent credentials. Her manager's presence at the party ensured that her employer would immediately become aware of the credential falsification. The family witnesses prevented her from denying or minimizing the extent of her deception. My strategic positioning as a server meant that I could observe and document the entire confrontation without being identified as the information source. This protected me from immediate retaliation while ensuring that the truth emerged through Jack's questioning rather than my direct accusation. The forensic principle of allowing evidence to speak for itself proved highly effective in this controlled exposure scenario. The immediate professional consequences were severe and measurable. Sheila's manager witnessed her admission of educational fraud in front of multiple co-workers, creating liability issues for the company if they continued employing someone with falsified credentials. The public nature of the revelation meant that terminating her employment became a legal necessity rather than an optional response to misconduct. The social consequences proved equally devastating and far-reaching. Extended family members who had attended the engagement party immediately understood that Sheila's claims about her educational and professional achievements were completely fabricated. Her fraudulent representations had been exposed in front of the exact social circle she had been trying to impress. This created permanent reputational damage that couldn't be reversed through future explanations. The financial impact on Sheila was immediate and substantial. Jack's family had been planning to contribute approximately $15,000 toward wedding expenses based on their belief that Sheila was an educated professional with stable earning capacity. The revelation that her entire professional identity was fraudulent eliminated this financial support and triggered demands for the return of the family heirloom engagement ring. The housing consequences created additional financial pressure that Sheila hadn't anticipated. Jack's request that she move out of their shared residence meant she would immediately face housing costs of approximately $1,200 to $2,500 monthly, which represented a significant portion of her actual earning capacity. Without the fraudulent credentials that had supported her lifestyle, she lacked the financial resources to maintain her previous standard of living. The employment termination that followed within days of the engagement party created a cascading financial crisis that perfectly illustrated the real-world cost of systematic deception. Sheila's loss of her $45,000 annual salary meant she could no longer afford the apartment, car payments, and lifestyle expenses she had been maintaining through fraud. The comprehensive nature of her lies meant that finding replacement employment would be extremely difficult without legitimate credentials. The psychological impact on Sheila was evident in her desperate attempts to control the narrative after the public exposure. Her calls to family members trying to minimize the significance of her deception demonstrated that she finally understood the permanent nature of the reputational damage. However, my strategic documentation and the public nature of the revelation meant that her typical manipulation tactics were no longer effective. My professional analysis of the situation indicated that Sheila's recovery from this level of public fraud exposure would require years of legitimate effort to rebuild her credentials, employment history, and social reputation. The comprehensive nature of her deception meant she couldn't simply apologize or explain away the systematic document forgery and false representations that had defined her adult life. The validation I received from family members who had previously enabled Sheila's behavior was professionally satisfying and personally meaningful. My parents' acknowledgement that they had warned her against the fraudulent credentials demonstrated that my strategic approach had been more effective than their years of gentle confrontation. The truth-based resolution created accountability that their protective approach had never achieved. The long-term consequences for Sheila included permanent damage to her professional reputation in a small industry where word spreads quickly about credential fraud. Her termination for falsified education would make future employment in similar roles extremely difficult. This effectively forced her to start over in lower-paying positions that didn't require the credentials she had been pretending to possess. The social isolation that resulted from the public exposure meant that Sheila lost not only her romantic relationship, but also the professional and social connections she had built through fraudulent representations. The comprehensive nature of her lies meant that virtually every relationship in her adult life had been based on false information. This made rebuilding extremely difficult. My strategic success in exposing her fraud validated years of careful documentation and professional preparation. The controlled revelation approach had achieved maximum damage to her fraudulent lifestyle, while protecting me from direct retaliation. The public nature of the exposure ensured that the truth couldn't be suppressed or reinterpreted through her typical manipulation tactics. The final outcome represented complete victory for truth-based accountability over systematic deception. Sheila's fabricated life collapsed entirely, forcing her to confront the real-world consequences of decades of fraudulent behavior. Jack's decision to end the engagement and demand the return of family property demonstrated that her manipulation strategies had finally encountered someone who couldn't be deceived indefinitely. Today, I'm completing my forensic accounting degree with enhanced appreciation for the power of systematic documentation and strategic evidence presentation. The Sheila situation provided practical experience in fraud exposure that has actually enhanced my professional credentials and demonstrated my ability to handle complex deception cases effectively. The most satisfying outcome is that my professional integrity and strategic thinking were validated through concrete results, while Sheila's assumption that lies and manipulation could substitute for actual achievements was definitively proven false through measurable consequences that permanently altered her life trajectory.